After a long break, your favorite channel is back with a powerful war story set in 1945, the brutal final stretch of World War II. Today's film dives into the unforgettable story of a single tank named Fury and the 5 American soldiers inside it, staring down what feels like an endless wave of Nazi forces. You can already guess, this won't be pretty. But this story proves something deeper. Wars aren't won by strength alone. They're won with sharp strategy, discipline, and nerve. It's easily one of the best war films out there. So let's skip the small talk and jump straight into the breakdown, though not before you smash that like button. April 1945, Allied forces pushing deep into Germany. Hitler's regime on the verge of collapse, yet Nazi troops still fighting with desperate intensity. The country is reduced to rubble from relentless combat. In the opening scene, we see a German commander riding through the wreckage on horseback until an American soldier suddenly leaps down from a tank, brutally takes him out, and sets the horse free. Fueled by vengeance and battle-hardened rage, that soldier is introduced as Don Collier. He's an American soldier commanding a deadly U.S. Army tank called Fury, deployed straight into combat against German forces. After eliminating the enemy commander, Don climbs back inside the tank, where 3 other crew members are waiting, but morale is rock bottom. One of their own was killed by German troops not long ago. The tank normally runs with a 5-man crew, each with a nickname. Commander Don Collier is known as Wardaddy, a title earned the hard way on the battlefield. Then there's Boyd, deeply religious and steady under pressure, Grady, and Gordo. The 5th member, Red, has just been killed by the Germans. Grief turns into tension, and arguments flare inside the cramped steel hull. But when heavy bombardment suddenly erupts around them, Wardaddy shuts it down and orders everyone to focus on the fight. Enemy aircraft begin pounding the area with relentless airstrikes, forcing the crew to move out and head toward a distant army camp. The tank needs urgent repairs. Once they reach the nearby camp, they arrange to remove Red's body with proper respect. Don then tells Bible to handle the essential repairs fast, because another mission is already waiting, this time pushing north deeper into Germany. In war, there's no such thing as a breather. Don and his crew grab a short rest at the army camp, but the pause doesn't last long. As Don heads back to the tank, a young soldier approaches and introduces himself. His name is Norman Ellison. He explains that he's been assigned to Fury as the new assistant driver, taking over the position left by the fallen crewman. One look at him says it all. He's barely more than a kid, his face carrying fear instead of battlefield grit. Don is immediately skeptical and frustrated. He needs an experienced tanker, not a rookie. When asked about his service time, Norman admits he enlisted just 3 weeks ago and has never even been inside a tank. He was a typist, shoved into combat with almost no preparation. Hearing this, Don can hardly believe it. Bringing an untested, terrified kid into armored warfare feels less like reinforcements and more like inviting disaster. Still, orders are orders, and Don reluctantly accepts him into the crew. The welcome isn't warm. When Norman tries to introduce himself, the others mock and haze him without mercy. Call it bullying, call it toughening him up. Either way, the message is clear. This isn't basic training. Norman quickly realizes war is brutal, and if he wants to survive, he'll have to endure the pressure and earn his place the hard way. Anyway, Norman climbs inside the tank and starts looking around, trying to take it all in. But the cramped interior is still smeared with blood, gore, and battlefield grime, and the shock overwhelms him. He stumbles back outside and throws up instantly. Right then, American troops drag a captured German soldier into the camp, and Don nearly loses it. Ever since Red's death, his anger toward the enemy has multiplied, and he charges forward like he's ready to tear the prisoner apart with his bare hands. It takes several soldiers to restrain him. Moments later, Don turns to Norman and orders him to shoot enemy soldiers on sight. Norman hesitates and admits he's never fired a live round before, hardly the resume you want in a war zone. Still, Don forces a rifle into his hands, and Grady starts giving him a crash course in how to use it. After a brief rest, the platoon captain arrives and briefs Don and the other sergeants on their next mission. Soon, the engines roar back to life and the armored column rolls out. Their objective? Link up with a U.S. Army unit known as Baker Company and launch an assault on a German-held town. Multiple tanks advance together toward Baker Company's position, with the tank Fury moving just behind the lead vehicle. Inside the tank, everyone, including Norman, is assigned their combat roles and positions. He's given a blunt order. If he spots a German soldier, he fires immediately. With that, the convoy pushes forward toward the front lines. At first, the convoy rolls across open fields, but soon they're forced to move through dense brush and thick tree lines. Don immediately warns the crew to stay sharp. Enemy soldiers could be hiding anywhere in that cover. Not long after, Norman spots two very young German soldiers moving between the trees. They look like kids, and he freezes, unable to pull the trigger. But the battlefield doesn't care about age. Moments later, an anti-tank explosive rockets out from the brush. The lead tank erupts in flames, and in seconds the crew inside is burning. Right before Norman's eyes, soldier stumbles out engulfed in fire, screaming. Then, unable to endure the pain, he shoots himself. The horror leaves Norman shaken to his core. Meanwhile, Don and the rest of the crew unleash suppressing fire and take out the hidden German fighters. After the firefight, Don climbs down, assesses the sightlines, and realizes Norman had a clear chance to engage. Furious, he demands an explanation. Norman insists they were just kids. Don snaps, slaps him, and makes the brutal lesson crystal clear. Those kids just destroyed a tank and killed American soldiers. From now on, if Norman sees the enemy, he fires. No hesitation, no exceptions. The order hits hard. A young man who's never harmed a soul is being forced to accept the unforgiving math of war, hesitate, and people die. With the lead tank destroyed, Don steps up as the new convoy commander and takes control over the radio, directing the entire platoon forward. When they reach Baker Company's position, Don and the other tank commanders meet with the company captain, who warns them that German forces are dug in at the town entrance with machine guns and heavy weapons. The roadblock has to be cleared before any ground troops can move in. The plan is simple. If the tanks provide armored cover and suppressive fire, infantry casualties will stay lower. Following the strategy, Don advances with the tanks while friendly soldiers move in behind them for protection. Just as expected, the Germans are already waiting, and the moment the tanks come into view, heavy machine gun fire erupts. U.S. troops quickly take cover behind the armor. Under Don's command, Boyd locks onto enemy positions and opens fire, prompting the rest of the tanks to unleash a barrage of their own. Within moments, several German positions are obliterated. Still, some enemy fighters crawl through the chaos and push closer to the tanks, firing as they move, forcing American infantry to return fire from behind cover. Tank-mounted machine guns thunder non-stop, turning the entrance into a wall of noise and smoke. In the middle of it all, Norman struggles to keep up. Overwhelmed, unsure where to aim, and running out of ammo, he fumbles to reload. Just then, Trini steps in and neutralizes the attackers closing in on them. However, the German line finally buckles under the relentless assault. Most of the remaining German fighters try to flee, but they're cut down by tank shells and relentless fire from Baker Company's troops. In the chaos, Gordo tells Norman to fire into a pile of bodies, because unless you're absolutely sure, dead enemies can get back up and strike. Norman finds it horrifying and completely unnatural. Overwhelmed, he breaks down and shouts that he can't handle any more of it. Don shuts him up fast. Drawing on years of combat experience, Don pinpoints every remaining German machine gun nest and coordinates a synchronized assault, 4 tanks firing together, wiping out the heavy guns in seconds. That battlefield instinct is exactly why they call him Wardaddy. After the final push, German resistance collapses and American forces sweep the area clean. But inside the tank, Norman just sits there, stunned. When the fighting ends, Don tells him that the seat he's occupying once belonged to the best soldier in the platoon. Now it's filled by someone who looks completely out of his depth. Norman fires back that he was trained to type 60 words a minute, not to fight in armored warfare. He'd never even seen a tank up close before this war, but he's trying his best to adapt. Soon after, U.S. troops bring in a captured German soldier. Some of the men want to make an example of him on the spot, but Don intervenes. He orders Norman out of the tank, presses a pistol into his hand, and tells him to execute the prisoner. He reasons, if Norman wants to survive on the battlefield, he has to prove he has the nerve to do what war demands. This moment is meant to be Norman's first kill, but he refuses to execute a defenseless man. The captured German pleads for his life, showing photos of his wife and children. Norman is shaken to the core, but Don doesn't budge. If Norman won't shoot the prisoner, he'll be the one who dies. Make a choice, your life or his. After wrestling with the decision, Norman says he'd rather be killed than take a life. That's when Don decides he's out of patience. He forces Norman to the ground, shoves a gun into his hand, and makes him pull the trigger. The prisoner is killed, and Norman is left emotionally wrecked, sinking into shock and trauma rather than gaining the toughness everyone expects. The crew tries to explain that Don's ruthless methods are exactly why he survived so long and kept his men alive. He's hard when he has to be, but he looks after his crew too. Not long after, Don tells Norman to get some food, pointing out he hasn't eaten all day. With the firefight over, the unit pushes deeper into the city. Along the way, they pass civilians hanging from gallows, signs pinned to their chests stating they refuse to fight for Germany, labeled cowards and executed as punishment by the Schutzstaffel. War doesn't just scar battlefields, it stains everything it touches. Seeing the aftermath, Don tells Norman to take a hard look at who he was trying to spare, an enemy willing to execute their own people to keep the war machine running. As they move deeper into the city, they're suddenly pinned by a hidden sniper, but Don quickly spots the position and blasts it apart. Moments later, machine gun fire erupts from nearby buildings, and he methodically neutralizes those threats too. Something shifts inside Norm. The fear gives way to focus, and he starts firing back with confidence, taking down multiple enemy soldiers. His shooting is sharp enough to earn rare praise from Don. With coordinated armor and infantry pressure, the Americans secure the town faster than expected. The remaining German troops emerge waving white flags and surrender. It becomes clear how desperate the situation has grown. Many of the defenders are just teenagers, rushed into a collapsing front. Among them stands an SS commander, whom Don identifies as the real culprit who threw unprepared youths into a doomed fight. Seconds later, another American soldier executes the commander. The unit locks down the town and begins clearing buildings. Inside one structure, they discover a grim scene. Several German soldiers who drank through the night and took their own lives by morning, believing capture meant certain death. For them, suicide felt like the only escape from a war that had already swallowed everything. Afterward, Don heads downstairs and notices a woman moving through another building. He brings Norman along as they enter and carefully search the rooms, discovering a second young woman hiding inside. Both are terrified, clearly expecting the worst from occupying soldiers. Instead, Don keeps things calm and respectful, pulling out eggs from his rations and telling them to make breakfast. The tension eases. Norman spots a piano and starts playing, and the young woman, Emma, is visibly moved by the music. She softly joins in, singing along, and the mood shifts from fear to fragile normalcy. Don notices the connection and jokes that if Emma weren't clearly into Norman, he'd be making his own move. Taking the hint, Norman spends some private time with her while her sister hesitates but is reassured to give them space. The two share a quiet, human moment, brief warmth in the middle of war. Later, Norman rejoins Don at the table as Emma and her sister finish preparing breakfast. But the calm doesn't last. Boyd, Grady, and Gordo barge in. Grady, especially rough around the edges, starts mocking Norman and making crude jokes. The others carry a tense, restless energy, part jealousy, part the psychological strain of soldiers who've spent too long surrounded by violence and too little normal life. War has a way of draining grace out of people. Fast, Don lays down a hard rule. No one touches the women, no harassment, no nonsense. That stance creates friction within the crew. They can't believe he's drawing a line like that, especially over a kid like Norman. The tension simmers, and Grady keeps needling Emma with snide remarks. Don quietly slides his own breakfast portion over to Emma after Grady has eaten some of hers, a small gesture that says plenty. As they eat, Trini drifts into a grim story from France about the mass killing of horses. Don's already on edge, and Grady's constant joking pushes him closer to snapping. The moment Don's anger shows, the room goes silent. Soon, new orders come in. Don meets with his colonel for mission details while Norman tries to write down Emma's address, hoping to hold on to something human in the middle of chaos. Gordo pulls him away. Duty calls. A group of U.S. soldiers is pinned down ahead, unable to advance because of German armor, and Don's unit must roll in and provide cover. The crew heads back to their tank, Norman included, but just as they reach it, a German plane screams overhead and unleashes a brutal bombing run. With explosions tearing up the street, the men dive beneath the tank for cover. When the bombing finally stops and the aircraft disappears, Norman peers out from under the steel hull and sees devastation everywhere. In the rubble lies Emma, someone who represented a fragile piece of normal life. The sight shatters him. In that brief connection, Norman had grown unexpectedly close to Emma, which makes her sudden death feel like a personal earthquake. He's shattered, but Grady drags him away before grief can paralyze him. War doesn't pause for heartbreak. Norman climbs back into the tank, and the crew rolls out again into more uncertainty. Don tries to steady him, reflecting on how he's fought Germans across Africa and France and now on their own soil, reminding him the war may be nearing its end, but plenty more will die before it's over. As they advance, disaster strikes without warning. A massive shell screams in from long range and obliterates one of their 4 tanks instantly. Don orders the remaining 3 to maneuver and quickly realizes what they're facing. A feared German heavy tank, the Tiger I. During World War II, Allied crews dreaded this machine. Its armor was so thick that most incoming rounds couldn't penetrate, letting it shrug off the hits that would cripple other vehicles. Don doesn't panic. He directs a fighting withdrawal, returning fire while repositioning the tanks. Then, on his command, The three Shermans surge forward at full speed, guns blazing. The Tiger proves brutally effective, destroying two tanks almost single-handedly. Only Fury remains. Thinking fast, Dawn uses sharp battlefield tactics to swing Fury wide and circle behind the German tank. The enemy lands a hit, but the damage is limited. Fury is tough, upgraded, and still very much in the fight. Following Dawn's orders, Fury maneuvers into the perfect firing position and lands two direct shots to the enemy tank's front armor, finally knocking it out for good. As two crew members scramble out trying to escape, Dawn guns them down, while Norman fires from inside the tank and takes out the commander. Despite losing two of their own tanks, the crew manages to destroy one of the most feared German machines on the battlefield. But the mission isn't over. When Dawn tries calling for reinforcements, he realizes their radio is dead. No backup, no guidance, just their own judgment. Dawn decides to push forward with Fury alone, even though the others warn him it's a huge risk. One tank can't easily do the job meant for four. Still, they roll on toward the hills. Then disaster strikes again. A massive landmine detonates beneath them, snapping the track and wrecking the suspension. Fury is crippled. Dawn quickly assesses the damage and knows they're not going anywhere until the tank is repaired, and fixing it will take time they don't really have. Stranded in a desolate valley with no radio contact and no friendly units nearby, they're effectively on their own. Dawn decides they'll hold position until a U.S. Army unit passes through the area. He sends Norman to scout and stand watch in the nearby woods, while the rest of the crew works urgently to get the tank operational again. War just turned into a waiting game, with teeth. While standing watch, Norman suddenly hears distant voices singing in unison. He looks toward the sound and freezes. Marching their way is a massive German force, nearly 300 soldiers strong. Norman sprints back and reports everything to Dawn, whose expression says he already knows what that means. It's a unit from the notorious Schutzstaffel. The moment the crew hears this, panic sets in. Grady, Trini, and Boyd start packing up, ready to pull out fast. Dawn refuses. He says he's never run from a fight and won't start now. Fury is his home, and he's making his stand right here. The others stare at him like he's lost his mind. A crippled tank versus hundreds of elite troops? That's not a battle plan, that's a last stand. Dawn tells them to leave anyway, but Norman steps forward and says he's staying. One by one, the rest choose to stand with their commander. They all understand the odds. 5 men, 1 disabled tank, and an enemy force that could swallow them whole. It's practically a suicide mission. Still, this is the brutal math of battlefield honor. Sometimes you hold the line because it's the line. Together, they craft a desperate plan. They drag bodies onto and around the tank and set them on fire, creating the illusion from a distance that Fury has already been destroyed. In reality, the crew hides inside, weapons ready, waiting to spring the trap. Dawn rallies the crew and makes sure every weapon on Fury is fully loaded. If they're going to hold off an army, they'll need a mountain of ammo. They stockpile roughly 50 hand grenades inside the tank and then go silent and lying in wait for the enemy to walk into their trap. Around dusk, troops from the Schutzstaffel arrive. Seeing flames around the tank, they assume it's disabled and send soldiers to inspect it. That's when Dawn and his crew open fire. The first soldier trying to pop the hatch is shot dead instantly. The hatch slams shut, and all of Fury's guns erupt at once, unleashing a wall of steel. German troops fall in waves. Those who try to take cover inside nearby buildings don't last long. Dawn's crew blasts the structures apart. The sustained barrage turns the area into chaos, bodies piling up across the battlefield. One crippled tank holding off a massive force. It's the kind of last stand soldiers tell stories about for generations. Eventually, the tank runs low on ammunition. On Dawn's command, they toss smoke grenades outside, blanketing the area in thick gray cover. Under the smokescreen, Boyd scrambles up to retrieve extra ammo from the top-mounted machine gun, while Dawn and Norman lay down covering fire. Some German soldiers push dangerously close, but Dawn cuts them down one after another. Bible and Norman manage to climb back inside, while Dawn keeps firing at the advancing enemy, refusing to give them an inch. Eventually, Dawn runs out of rifle ammo. The last German soldier in front of him goes down from a brutal butt stroke, and with a pistol in hand, Dawn takes out 2 more. But one determined enemy climbs atop the tank, forcing Dawn into a savage hand-to-hand fight. He flips the soldier inside the cramped interior, slits his throat with a knife, but not without sustaining a cut himself in the struggle. Once the hatch is secured, Boyd quickly bandages Dawn's wound. Replenished with fresh ammunition, the crew resumes firing, cutting down more German troops. But the enemy is relentless. SS soldiers launch explosives at Fury, damaging part of the tank and fatally wounding Grady, who dies shortly after. As their ammo dwindles, the Germans intensify their assault, trying every tactic to crush the tank. Don switches to hand grenades, taking out clusters of enemies, while the crew, now forced to fight with captured weapons, searches and shoots their way through approaching soldiers. Don keeps mowing them down with the top-mounted machine gun. When Boyd is nearly killed, Norman drags him inside to safety. Meanwhile, Trini climbs in, lobs grenades from the tank's interior, and continues eliminating the relentless German force. The battlefield becomes a desperate, close-quarters fight, with every ounce of courage and strategy keeping them alive against overwhelming odds. Even after all the carnage, the Germans just wouldn't stop. They brought out their deadliest weapon, a sniper, picking off anyone in sight with deadly precision. When Boyd tried to hand Don a rifle from inside the tank, he was shot instantly, falling to the ground lifeless. At the same time, Trini attempted to throw a grenade, but a sniper round struck him mid-action, sending the grenade rolling into the tank. Without hesitation, he pressed it to his chest, sacrificing himself to save the crew in a final, heroic act. With all others gone, only Don and Norman remained. They were completely out of ammunition, yet Don continued fighting as if he alone could hold back the tide. Then the sniper landed 3 flawless shots directly on Don, finally forcing him to relinquish the fight. Retreating inside the tank, he turned to Norman, apologizing and admitting that all of this had happened because of him. Norman, surprisingly calm, reminded Don that this was the reality of war, and that in this battle, they had survived. When Norman suggested surrendering, Don immediately warned him that the SS would not spare him. They'd torture him mercilessly, a fate worse than death. But Don wasn't about to let the young soldier die here. He directed Norman to a secret hatch under the tank, the only escape route left. Outside, German soldiers surrounded the tank, attempting desperately to breach it. Each time someone tried to open the hatch, Don fired his revolver with lethal accuracy, cutting them down and giving Norman the slim chance to escape. Then, the remaining 2 Germans hurled grenades at the tank's hatch, slamming it shut and leaving no other way out. Norman had no choice but to take the only exit, and the moment he emerged, both grenades exploded, claiming the life of the brave Don right before his eyes. Norman could do nothing but watch in horror, powerless to intervene, and spent hours hiding beneath the rubble, every nerve on edge, as the SS soldiers scoured the area for any survivors. At one point, a young SS soldier with a flashlight spotted him, but surprisingly, he did nothing and simply walked away, perhaps recognizing someone his own age and sparing him out of a fleeting sense of mercy. Norman survived the night in this makeshift graveyard, shaken and exhausted. At dawn, he cautiously returned to the tank, only to find the lifeless bodies of all his comrades inside. Overwhelmed by the finality of it all, he draped his coat over Don's face, a silent tribute to a fallen hero who had given everything for his country. Just as he began to brace himself for what seemed like the end, the tank's hatch suddenly creaked open, and instead of enemies, it was their own platoon members, finally arriving to check if anyone had survived the hellish ordeal, offering a glimpse of hope after the nightmarish carnage. When the platoon finally sees Norman, they are utterly stunned. After witnessing such devastation and losing so many, the fact that one man survived like a miracle seems almost impossible. They begin calling him a hero, but in Norman's eyes, the horror of the battle still lingers. The loss of his comrades weighs heavily on him, and he can't seem to come to terms with their deaths. Yet this is the harsh truth of war. It's about sacrifice, giving everything for a cause greater than oneself. Standing at a distance, Norman gazes at the battered tank, his eyes reflecting both grief and reverence, taking in the finality of all that has transpired. And with this solemn, poignant moment, the story of Fury comes to its end, leaving viewers with a haunting reminder of bravery, loss, and the human cost of war.